My name is Judith. I'm 66 years old, living alone in a wooden house by Sebago Lake in Maine, the place that was home for over 30 years for me and my late husband. After he passed, I thought nothing could ever stir my heart again. Until my son, David, suddenly invited me to join him and his new wife, Melissa, a beautiful young woman I'd never met in person, on a cruise. He said it was a thank you gift for taking care of everything by myself after my husband died. That night, in the ship's main dining room, the chandelier light shimmered on the surface of the red wine in front of me. Melissa was beaming as she danced with David. And at that exact moment, an older gentleman seated at the next table leaned toward me, his voice raspy but firm. "You should be careful. I just saw her drop something into your glass." I said nothing. Just looked at him, then back at the wine. In that brief instant, I quietly switched my glass with Melissa's. 15 minutes later, Melissa began to tremble. She started mumbling about a house by the lake, some papers that were already prepared, and a life forever there. What would you do if your future daughter-in-law tried to poison you right in front of your son? If someone wanted to replace you in the very life you built, how would you fight back? Leave a comment below, hit like if you've ever had doubts about someone being too nice, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear what happened next, because what followed was darker than anything you can imagine. I'd been living alone for nearly 8 years in our 3-story wooden home overlooking Sebago Lake in Maine. That house had been my sanctuary with Robert, my husband, who spent his life turning it into a peaceful, light-filled haven packed with memories. After he died, even the sounds inside the house seemed to fall silent. The window panes gathered dust. The old wall clock that Robert used to fix by hand every month stopped ticking, as if it, too, was mourning him. I didn't have many close friends. Most had either moved away or, like Robert, were gone for good. David, my son, had lived in Boston most of the time since graduating from Stanford. The phone calls grew less frequent, sometimes just a quick holiday greeting. I didn't blame him. I understood that young people had their own lives, their own ambitions. But I couldn't deny the quiet ache, the emptiness that crept into those long afternoons sitting alone on the porch, watching the sunset dissolve over the still lake. That's why, when David called one morning in early May, his voice unusually warm and excited, I nearly burst into tears just hearing him. "Mom, how are you?" I have great news," he said, his tone boyish again. "I want to take you on a real trip. A cruise." I placed a hand on my chest, trying to calm the sudden rush in my heart. "A cruise?" I asked, trying to hide the joy rising inside me. "Yes. Around the Caribbean. 10 days. And you'll meet my wife." "Your wife?" I almost gasped. You're married already?" "Well, we just filed the paperwork last week. I know I should have told you sooner, but it all happened so fast. Her name's Melissa. I think you'll really like her. We want to bring you along to celebrate together." Celebrate? I didn't ask for details. Maybe to mark the start of their marriage. Or maybe, I let myself believe, my son still remembered his parents' wedding anniversary, now just mine to carry alone. I'd often imagined the day I'd meet my future daughter-in-law, a gentle, thoughtful woman who made my son happy. I didn't expect it would happen over a rushed video call. When the phone screen lit up, I saw a woman in her early 30s, golden hair, delicate features, and a pleasant smile. She said, "So happy to meet you, Judith," in a voice as polished as a television host. She told me she was a high school literature teacher at a private school, loved baking, read classic novels, and really admired how you decorated your home. David's shown me all the pictures. I couldn't help but smile. Though part of me felt everything was happening too fast, I still agreed to the invitation. I told myself to keep an open heart. Maybe this was the chance to reconnect with David. Maybe, after all this time, I had a second chance at feeling close to someone again. 3 days before the cruise, David invited me to dinner with them at a French restaurant in downtown Portland. I arrived a few minutes early and picked a table by the window overlooking the river, my fingers gripping a handkerchief embroidered with my name, Robert's gift on our 25th anniversary. When David and Melissa walked in, I saw she was even lovelier in person. Wearing a soft cream dress, her hair in gentle waves, and perfume subtle enough to make you lean closer. She hugged me gently, her smile effortless, her eyes bright with friendliness. MS. Judith, it's wonderful to meet you in person. David was right. You're a true lady of elegance. I smiled and nodded. Just call me Judith, dear. Melissa sat down and ordered a glass of Bordeaux, saying it was perfect for a summer evening. As the food arrived, she naturally led the conversation. Your house in Maine must be amazing, she said, eyes glowing. David always talks about the old wooden stove, those big windows over the lake, and that antique wall clock. I was surprised. David had told her that much. I'm obsessed with historic homes, especially ones with soul. Every wall, every object tells a story. Do you still keep many of Robert's things? Most of them, I replied, feeling a soft warmth inside. He loved collecting, especially nautical pieces. Melissa propped her chin on her hand and tilted her head. That sounds so romantic. If I were you, I'd never leave that house. Her comment passed by like a breeze, but something about it made me pause. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way she stared so intently, or the faint trace of something wistful in her tone. Then she smiled again. Have you thought about writing a will, Judith? I mean, not because of age or anything, but homes like that are treasures. I've seen some messy cases when families aren't prepared. David frowned. Melissa, come on. I'm sorry. She reached over and touched my hand. I didn't mean to be rude, Judith. I just taught a class on cultural heritage once, and I think about that stuff too much. I hope you're not upset. I shook my head, smiling thinly. It's all right. It's a fair question. Dinner ended with a shared apple tart. Melissa insisted we all try it. She said it was her late mother's favorite. When we said goodbye, she hugged me tight and whispered, I hope this trip helps the three of us become a real family. I stood outside the restaurant, watching them disappear into the city lights. My heart was in knots. There was something I couldn't name. A sense of warmth, tangled with something else. And I told myself, maybe I was just lonely. Maybe I was being too sensitive. I had no idea that dinner was just the beginning of a very dark journey, one where love, trust, and even reason would be pushed to their breaking point. 2 weeks before the cruise, Melissa began texting me nearly every day. She invited me to shop for the trip, flowy dresses for cocktail nights, wide-brimmed hats for lounging on deck, and wedge sandals she said were perfect for older ladies who still like to look stylish. I was used to shopping alone, but when someone holds your hand while picking scarves and listens as you talk about the sweater Robert loved, your heart starts to soften. We visited a little boutique downtown. As I held up a chestnut leather purse, Melissa tilted her head and asked sweetly, You still take blood pressure meds, right? I blinked, then nodded. Yes, but just a mild dose. My doctor says I'm stable. Then this trip is even more important. But, do you use a pill organizer? I shook my head. I still remember each one and when to take it. There aren't many. I just worry you might forget, especially with the time change and all the activities. I can help you set up a pill box if you'd like. I didn't know how to respond then. In a crowded shop, with her concerned eyes on me, I nodded almost instinctively. Melissa smiled and turned to browse silk scarves, like her offer had been nothing out of the ordinary. But back home, I couldn't shake the feeling. Not because she cared, but because I didn't recall ever telling her the exact meds I took, or where I usually kept them. The next day, Melissa came by my house. She brought a small tin of butter cookies, saying it was something her mom used to bake for the holidays. I made tea, and she sat across from me on the living room couch, her bright blue eyes scanning every corner of the house. You know, your home is even more beautiful in person, she said. I smiled. I guess David took those photos on a good day. I remember every corner. There's the antique wooden clock David said stopped the day Mr. Robert passed. And over there, the embroidery you hung for your 60th birthday. David told me so much, I feel like I've already lived here. Her words made me pause. I had only brought Melissa over once before. Just a quick walkthrough of the kitchen, living room, and dining area. She'd never seen Robert's study, the place where I kept old documents and important files. After tea, she asked to grab tissues and borrow a pen to jot down the number of a flower shop she'd mentioned. I pointed to the cabinet near the dining room. A few minutes later, as I came downstairs, I noticed the study door cracked open. When I stepped closer, there was Melissa, standing by Robert's old desk, a drawer open in her hand, and a bright smile on her face, like nothing was out of place. MS. Judith, I'm so sorry, she said, voice light as air. I thought this was the drawer with pens. Didn't expect financial records. I walked fully into the room, keeping my tone steady. If you ever need something, just ask. This room isn't one I let many people enter. I'm really sorry. Honestly. It was just habit. At school, I'm always opening the wrong cabinet in the teacher's lounge. She smiled and closed the drawer, then quickly walked out of the room, still holding the pen I had no idea where she found. I didn't say anything more. But I couldn't stop thinking about how precise every one of her questions had been. About the house, about when I received the insurance payout after Robert passed, about whether or not I was revising my will. I used to think people who cared too much about money were often judged as calculating. But Melissa was always so subtle that it was hard to pin down anything specific to suspect. Another day, when I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water, I saw her leaning lightly against the counter, phone pressed to her ear. No, it's still in her purse. It's fine. Just a few more days. Don't rush, she said, then immediately switched to a cheerful tone when she saw me. Miss Judith. I was just booking a spa appointment on the ship. Looks like they've got amazing skincare treatments. I smiled, but a chill ran down my spine. Maybe I misheard. Or maybe I shouldn't have heard at all. That night, I went through my purse and noticed my blood pressure medication had been moved. The cap was slightly loose. I counted the pills. Seemed like the right number. But I couldn't remember the last time I had opened the bottle myself. I wondered, was I imagining things? Was I becoming paranoid like other older people, where loneliness made every kind gesture feel like a potential threat? But one thing kept me awake that night. Even though she had only been to my house once, Melissa seemed to remember where everything was. Every drawer, every cabinet, every door. As if she had lived there for a long time, just waiting to officially replace me. I started feeling unusually tired the morning after Melissa's last visit. First, there was a dizzy spell while I was tidying up Robert's study. I had just bent down to pick up a notebook that had fallen from the shelf when I suddenly had to grab the desk to steady myself. Everything around me spun lightly, like there was a thin film over my glasses. I told myself maybe I hadn't had breakfast yet, or my blood pressure had dropped. But after standing still for a few minutes, the dizziness disappeared as quickly as it had come. I didn't want to worry unnecessarily, so I made myself a glass of lemon water and sat in the armchair by the window, watching the lake. But something vague began to creep in, a feeling I couldn't name, both unsettling and uncomfortable, like something inside my body wasn't quite right and slipping beyond my control. The next morning, as I was driving to the farmer's market like I did every Saturday, I suddenly couldn't remember the way back. It was a road I had driven hundreds of times, but after taking the first turn, I stared at the road signs and just couldn't be sure which direction to go. I had to pull over, turn off the engine, and breathe deeply, my hands trembling as I opened the map on my phone. When I finally got home, Melissa was already waiting on the porch, holding a box of fresh cinnamon rolls from our favorite bakery. She smiled gently when she saw me stepping out of the car, still visibly shaken. Where were you, Miss Judith? I thought maybe you got stuck in traffic. I started to tell her about getting lost, but then hesitated. I didn't want to say it out loud, because saying it would make it real. But Melissa seemed to read something in my face. Are you okay? You look a little tired. I gave a weak smile. Maybe I didn't sleep well. We went inside, and I poured us both cups of tea. While I was putting the rolls into the oven, Melissa gently sat at the kitchen table, resting her chin on her hand, as if waiting for the perfect moment to say something she'd already rehearsed. Miss Judith, please don't be upset with me for saying this. I turned, looking at her, still holding the dish towel. You've seemed really tired lately. I think, maybe it's time to consider a retirement community, or one of those high-end care centers. The kind with on-site doctors 24/7 and daily activities. You could rest, meet new people, not have to worry about managing everything alone. I know a lovely place in Vermont. I stayed quiet, lowering my head slightly to hide the change in my expression. I know you care, I said softly, but I'm still able to take care of myself. Melissa gently touched the back of my hand. I didn't mean to offend, really. But have you thought about what would happen if you fainted at home and no one was around? David's so busy, and I'm far away. I'd be heartbroken if something happened and we didn't know in time. She pulled out her phone and showed me a slideshow of pictures. Modern senior facilities, private rooms with glass windows overlooking maple woods, elders in light exercise were playing chess, painting, singing. I looked at those images, my heart tangled in knots. I wasn't afraid of aging. I was afraid of being seen as a burden. I was afraid that one day, my son would no longer see me as a mother to be loved, but just a woman fading into the shadows of broken memories. That afternoon, I called my doctor and scheduled a full checkup. Dr. Foster, who had been monitoring my health for over 10 years, checked my blood pressure, heart, ran blood tests, and concluded that everything looked normal. Probably just mild stress, Judith. You're about to travel, meet strangers, change your eating and sleeping routine. All of that can make you feel a little off. I nodded, trying to believe it. But the next morning, while watering the plants on the porch, I tried to call the neighbor's cat, a cat that had curled up in my lap every evening just weeks ago, but I couldn't remember its name. I got it wrong 3 times before giving up, letting the water spill over the flower pot. I sat on the steps, holding my head in my hands. A strange feeling rose inside me, not fear exactly, but a slow emptiness, like something was quietly dissolving within me, piece by piece. Melissa arrived just as I was wiping water from my skirt. Miss Judith, are you all right? You look really tired. I nodded without saying a word. She sat down beside me, gently putting an arm around my shoulder like a kind, concerned daughter-in-law. I know you don't want to think about moving, but I really believe you should try it. Just a few weeks. Think of it like a vacation. You might end up liking it. I turned to look at her, searching her eyes for a hint of sincerity, something I could hold on to believe this was just kindness. But her eyes were too perfect. Like she had practiced them in the mirror. I didn't argue. I just nodded to let it pass. But from that afternoon on, I started keeping my medication in a separate locked drawer. And each morning, I quietly counted the pills in the soft morning light, as if my life was now measured by how many capsules remained untouched. The cruise began under the brilliant Caribbean sun and the echo of laughter bouncing off marble floors in the main atrium. My mind still carried the weight of unease from everything that had happened before the trip, but I tried to quiet my thoughts. The setting was too perfect to nurture suspicion. The ship was like a floating city. Transparent elevators, Italian restaurants with gold-trimmed menus, herbal foot baths at the spa, a rooftop bar serving French wine. I was placed in a private cabin not far from David and Melissa's room, at the end of the 6th-floor hallway. Melissa called it a brilliant setup so she could take care of me easily, but to me, it felt like a reminder that I couldn't go far without them. The first 3 days passed like oil paintings, still, bright, and a little too flawless. Melissa joined me at every meal, spoke gently, even cut my salmon for me like I couldn't manage a fork. David tried to act normal, but his face often turned distant when I talked about home, or the times Robert used to take us camping, or the old keepsakes I'd saved in the garage. I could sense something unspoken in my son's eyes. As if he was carrying a weight he didn't know how to put into words. Each time I asked, David would shift the topic to work or ask if I needed to rest. Melissa always jumped in with a funny story or a massage suggestion to help forget the past. On the fourth afternoon, while I sat alone reading on the deck, I noticed an older man nearby, holding a cup of tea, gazing far into the horizon. It wouldn't have seemed strange, except I remembered seeing him at the gym that morning, then at the third-floor breakfast lounge, and again by the mini library around noon. He didn't avoid eye contact. When I looked up, he nodded politely. I smiled back, but my heart skipped a beat. He wasn't dressed in anything flashy, a light grey linen shirt, khaki pants, reading glasses hanging from a dark cloth strap. But there was something about him I couldn't look away from. Maybe it was his upright posture, the sharpness in his eyes, or maybe the way he looked at me, not with curiosity but with purpose. That evening, dinner was held on the top deck. Melissa wore a tight-fitting red dress, her blonde hair in soft waves, lips painted in a deep crimson shade. David wore a charcoal grey suit. He looked tired, but still kept a polite smile. As for me, though I had on the navy blue dress Melissa picked out before the trip, I still felt like an outsider in a carefully curated family portrait. While we were eating the main course, I caught a glimpse of that man again at a table across the room, sitting with 3 other people. But his eyes were still on me. "Mrs. Judith, is the fish all right?" Melissa asked, pulling me back to the present. "It's fine," I replied. "Though I don't think I have a taste for anything this salty." "I thought so too," she laughed. "Better to eat light, especially after 60. The stomach and the memory both need rest, don't they?" I stayed quiet. That comment wasn't casual. And it wasn't as gentle as her tone pretended. That night, back in my cabin, an unnamed feeling stirred inside me. I set down the book in my hands and opened the small window to let the sea breeze in. The only sounds were the soft waves and the vibration of the ship's engine beneath the floor. But then I heard something, not from outside, but from the room next door. I recognized Melissa's voice first. "I told you if we wait too long, she'll start to suspect." Then came David's voice, low and strained. "I'm not comfortable with this. At least wait until we're home. David, there is no later. The Vermont deal has to be signed before the 15th. I've already prepared everything. I thought we were just testing the waters. Not signing anything yet. We don't have time. She's getting weaker. This is the best chance we'll get. I already spoke to the attorney." I couldn't hear clearly after that. They started whispering, but each word was like a sharp blade slicing through every ounce of trust one had tried to rebuild with my son. "Sign what? What deal? Who's getting weaker?" I leaned my head against the wooden wall, gripping the armrest tightly. Questions stabbed through my mind like tiny knives. And then I remembered the look in that older man's eyes when he watched me on the deck. I realized, maybe the one who's been following me isn't here to harm me. Maybe he's here to save me. The formal dinner was held on Friday night, about a week into our journey. The banquet hall looked like something out of a dream. Golden light from crystal chandeliers reflected off high ceilings. Soft jazz floated between white linen-covered tables. Everyone was dressed to the nines. I wore a moss green velvet dress, a birthday gift from Robert when I turned 60. Melissa walked in a few minutes after me, striding confidently in a shimmering amber mermaid gown. Her perfume drifted in like a thin veil of smoke. David followed close behind, his hand resting gently on her back, smiling, but his eyes lacked joy. We were seated at a table near the center, with a clear view of the dance floor. As a waiter poured red wine into our glasses, I noticed that same familiar gaze from the adjacent table. He was still there. The silver-haired man with eyes calm and sharp as deep water, the same one I'd seen multiple times throughout the trip, was sitting alone with a small cup of espresso. When I turned to look, he tilted his head and spoke. "You should be careful. he said quietly, still looking toward our table as if discussing the menu. I just saw her slip something into your wine. My eyebrows lifted slightly. I didn't turn my head right away. My heart pounded like a warning drum. But I smiled at him as if he'd just made a polite comment about the weather. Melissa laughed and chatted with David, her hand brushing past my wine glass as she pretended to adjust the silverware. Then her purse buzzed. Excuse me, I need to take this call, she said, rising with the grace of a ballet dancer. As she walked away, I quickly switched our glasses, mine with hers, without a trace. David didn't notice. He was staring at his phone. I clenched my hands under the table, lips trembling slightly. Not from fear, just tension. I didn't know what would happen next, only that I'd just done something that could change everything. Melissa returned within 3 minutes, her face glowing as if she'd just received good news. Sorry, she smiled. It was the Vermont realtor. They confirmed everything's ready. I said nothing. She sat down, lifted the glass, my glass, and gently clinked it against David's. To a brilliant future, she said. To family, David replied, smiling faintly. I lifted my glass to my lips but didn't drink. I watched her take nearly the entire glass down in one sip. 15 minutes later, I noticed the change. Melissa laughed louder than usual at a cheerful tune. She began telling a story about her teaching days but kept repeating the part about a gray cat, causing puzzled looks around the table. David frowned. Are you okay? Your face is a little red. Just warm, she replied, then giggled. Must be the wine. Oh, remember that lake in Vermont? The one near the care facility? They say it looks like a painting. I glanced at David. His expression froze. Melissa continued. We could live there someday. When everything's done. After the papers are signed, I'll, you know. Her voice grew uneven, speech losing its rhythm. She tapped a spoon gently against the glass, like she was listening to music. I feel like swimming in honey, weightless and sticky. David abandoned his dessert and put down his spoon. Melissa, you're not okay. We should go back to the room. No. I still want to talk to Judith. She needs to know about the lake. And the will. Someone already signed it but didn't tell her. That last sentence sent a chill through me. David shot to his feet, helping Melissa up as she stumbled. You're drunk. Let's go. I'm not drunk, Melissa muttered, eyes wide. I'm just floating, like a red leaf, on the lake. Vermont Lake. Green papers, purple ink. The entire table went silent. Nearby guests turned with uneasy glances. A woman whispered to her husband. A waiter cautiously approached, ready to intervene. David practically dragged her from the table. Melissa leaned fully on him, still mumbling nonsense, lips moving as if reciting poetry. I remained seated, hands resting on the table. The trembling wasn't from fear, but shock. She had planned to poison me. But now she was the one unraveling under the very substance she meant for me. I turned and, for the first time, looked directly at the man at the next table. He had left his seat at some point and now stood nearby, eyes still fixed on me. He gave a slight nod. I returned it, slowly. No words were needed. We both understood. Everything had just shifted. And I was no longer the passive one. David practically carried Melissa out of the banquet hall, his face pale as if all the blood had drained from it. She giggled one moment, then muttered incoherently the next, her eyes darting and her hands tracing invisible patterns in the air. I stood up right after them, trying to appear concerned. I followed close behind, clutching my purse, voice gentle and urgent. David, let me come with you. Maybe it's just the wine, but it's best to have her checked. He turned and nodded, clearly overwhelmed. We helped Melissa back to their cabin. She collapsed onto the bed as soon as she touched it, still whispering about red maple leaves and pre-signed agreements. David placed a cold towel on her forehead, then turned to me, trembling. "Mom, what's happening?" I've never seen her like this. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You stay here with Melissa. I'll call the ship's medical staff. They may want to take a closer look." David nodded, burying his face in his hands, trying to make sense of the impossible. I left their room, gripping my phone but not dialing. I didn't head to the medical bay. I returned to the banquet hall, now nearly empty. And in a corner under the soft golden light, he was still there, the man whose eyes had followed me through this journey. He stood up as he saw me approaching. Without a word, we stepped out onto the deck, where the sea breeze blew gently and the sound of waves lapped steadily beneath our feet. "My name is Charles Griffith," he said, his voice low and clear. "And I think it's time I tell you everything." I clasped my hands together and looked him straight in the eye. "Who is Melissa? Why do you know her?" Charles leaned against the railing, his eyes fixed on the blurry horizon in the night. 5 years ago, my wife, Margaret, began showing signs of memory loss. We were living in Connecticut. She was a healthy, independent woman who had managed the family finances for decades. One day, she met a young woman at church, introduced herself as Emily, said she was a volunteer supporting the elderly. Just like Melissa, beautiful, thoughtful, devoted. I listened, each word hitting me square in the chest. "Within 3 months," Charles continued, "Margaret started forgetting the names of her closest friends. She confused our granddaughter's birthday, got lost walking around the neighborhood. I thought it was a medical issue. We went to see doctors. They couldn't find anything conclusive. All the tests came back fine. But I knew Margaret. She couldn't have changed that fast." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Then I started paying closer attention. This girl Emily would bring her coffee, herbal tea, cookies. Then one day, I saw her holding Margaret's pill organizer. Margaret said, 'Emily helps me set my meds each day, it's convenient.' But I've never seen anyone swap pills that quickly. I tested it. Switched bottles, installed a hidden camera. 3 days later, Margaret had a stroke. She didn't die, but fell into a coma. 3 weeks later, she passed. There was no evidence. Police said it was old age, maybe a cardiac complication." Charles turned to me, his eyes sharp like a finely honed blade. But I knew. It wasn't coincidence. After the funeral, I hired a private investigator. Emily's real name is Ava Richardson. 3 fake aliases, 2 IDs flagged by the financial system, for suspicious inheritances from elderly individuals living alone or with large estates. I was frozen. A chill crawled down my spine like a current seeping into my bones. "And Melissa?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "She's Ava. Same person. My investigator's been tracking her for nearly 3 years. Always changing names, changing professions. Sometimes a teacher, sometimes a private caregiver, sometimes claiming to be a wellness coach." I placed a hand over my chest, the weight of dread curling like a snake in my stomach. "And I'm her next victim." Charles nodded silently. "I don't have enough legal evidence. But I know I can't let her keep going. I've been waiting for one mistake. And today, she finally revealed herself." I leaned gently against the railing. From a distance, the music from the ballroom still drifted softly. But in my head, all I could hear were Melissa's whispered words, David's uncertain glances, and my own trembling voice every morning when I couldn't recall what I'd eaten the night before. "You need to be careful," Charles said slowly. "She's not working alone. You don't know if David is truly innocent. You can't let her know you're suspicious. And if possible, don't drink anything you didn't pour yourself." I turned to him, my eyes locked with the gaze of someone who had already seen a life destroyed. "You'll help me, won't you?" "I won't let her do this again," Charles said, his voice low but firm. "Not to you." Not to anyone else. I nodded. I didn't yet know how this would all end. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone anymore. And Melissa, or Ava, had made a grave miscalculation. The next morning, Charles and I went straight to the ship's security office. The head of security was an Italian-American man in his 50s named Moretti. Stocky build, deep commanding voice. But what reassured me most was his eyes. There was something in them that told me he wasn't unfamiliar with terrible things hiding behind luxury. After I explained everything, and Charles confirmed what he had seen, Mr. Moretti asked us to wait in the main surveillance room. It wasn't large, but was fully equipped with big screens, recording devices, and encrypted access terminals. A technician entered a code and began reviewing footage from the restaurant on the 5th deck, where I usually dined with David and Melissa every morning and evening. Cameras were placed in corners, on the ceiling, even disguised inside chandelier bases, capturing every angle. Within minutes, the first image came up. A familiar scene. I was sitting near the window, holding a cup of coffee, looking out at the ocean. Melissa sat across from me, opening her purse. Mr. Moretti paused the video just as she pulled out a small bottle, like a perfume sample. He motioned to the technician to zoom in. On screen, we clearly saw the cap twist open, her index finger gently tipping the bottle toward the teacup in front of me. A fine white powder, almost invisible, dropped in and dissolved quickly. No one in frame noticed. I was busy talking. The server had his back turned. "I need 2 more clips, Mr. Moretti said. We need to establish a repeated pattern." They played another scene from the previous evening. Melissa stood to get a napkin but picked up my water glass first, then quietly poured a bit more from a bottle. Her cream-colored purse stayed in her lap. In another clip, I had stepped away to take a phone call from an old friend in Maine. The camera showed Melissa lean toward my coffee, her right hand pulling something from her coat pocket, making a quick move, then putting it back. The room fell silent. "Do you still have the pill bottle you brought on board?" Mr. Moretti asked. "I do," I said. "But I moved its hiding place. I've had a feeling something wasn't right for a while." "We'll need to search Melissa Mitchell's cabin," he said firmly, radioing 2 security officers. Less than 10 minutes later, Charles and I followed the team to David and Melissa's stateroom. David opened the door, looking disheveled, eyes red. Melissa lay on the bed, still dazed, mumbling incoherently. "Sorry, we need to inspect this cabin immediately," one officer said. "Company policy allows it if we suspect actions affecting passenger safety." David looked shocked. "Mom, what's going on? What did you say to them?" I didn't answer. I looked him directly in the eyes, and in that moment, I saw true fear, either because he had no idea, or because everything was about to unravel. The search began. They opened every drawer, suitcase, and makeup bag. One officer pulled out a small fabric pouch with a zipper from Melissa's suitcase. Inside were 4 small glass vials, unmarked, each filled with clear or slightly cloudy liquid. "I think we need these sent to the lab immediately," the officer said. Next, from the nightstand drawer, they retrieved a pill bottle similar to the one I had. My name was on the label, but the pills inside were a completely different color and shape. I reached for the bottle. "These aren't mine. These aren't what my doctor prescribed." She swapped them. While David stood frozen, they found something else in Melissa's suitcase. A USB drive hidden inside a makeup pouch. Mr. Moretti plugged it into his laptop right there. Within seconds, dozens of video files appeared, each one numbered and time-stamped. The first clip showed me in my own living room, holding a water glass, looking confused. Another clip showed me talking to a lamp as if it were a relative. In another, I sat on the bed, exhausted, repeating the name of a long-deceased friend. My knees nearly buckled as I realized she had secretly recorded me all this time. At home. On the ship. At my weakest, most confused moments. Why would she do this?" David asked, his voice rough. Charles stepped forward, facing him. To create a false record. She wanted to prove your mother lacked mental capacity. Once a doctor signs off, the court transfers guardianship to the next of kin. And if no one notices, she gets full control over her life, her assets, even her survival. David shook his head, stumbling backward like the entire room had just changed color. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. Mom, I didn't know. I thought she was just trying to help you. I looked at the son I had cradled through so many cold Maine winters. I didn't know what hurt more, what Melissa had done, or that David had let it happen under my roof without seeing it. As the security team continued their search, Mr. Moretti ordered the personal laptop and all electronic devices belonging to Melissa to be sealed. He explained that if we were to report this to law enforcement at the next port, all evidence had to be collected by the book. I stood quietly in the corner, my palms cold, though the ventilation hummed steadily above. David sat motionless on the edge of the bed, hands limp between his knees, staring blankly at the floor. Moments later, Charles returned from the tech room with another security staffer, holding Melissa's unlocked laptop. Mr. Moretti gave a silent nod and connected it to the large screen on the wall. We all stared at the email interface on screen, a mailbox filled with hundreds of folders, each labeled with unnerving precision. Phase 1, social interaction. Phase 2, medical. Phase 3, guardianship and assets. Phase 4, liquidation. She numbered the phases, Charles said quietly, like this was a financial strategy, not other people's lives. When we opened the Phase 1 folder, the first emails were exchanges between Melissa and an anonymous address. The sender's name kept changing, but the content clearly came from someone coaching her. What to say, how to behave to earn trust, which phrases worked best with the elderly, even psychological tricks to foster emotional dependency. One email nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. She loves stories about her late husband and the lakeside cabin. Tap into that more. Gradually introduce themes of aging, vulnerability, and the importance of not facing it alone. Emphasize the need for family support. When she starts to doubt her memory, encourage a medical visit and be ready to record episodes of confusion to use later as documentation. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Each word felt like salt pressed into an open wound. This was from almost 6 months ago, Mr. Moretti said in a low voice, before you'd even met her in person. Charles nodded. She had this planned out long ago. This wasn't random. She didn't just happen to meet David. David still hadn't spoken a word since the first email appeared. He sat frozen. Next came Phase 2. Inside were Word documents, Melissa's twisted version of a health journal she'd kept on me. Status: tires easily, forgetful, mild disorientation in the morning. Couldn't recall the neighbor's cat's name. Left her wallet behind twice in the same week. Repeats herself when telling stories. Can't distinguish between dates and days. She had fabricated an entire false medical profile. Another file titled Temporary Guardianship Petition, edited version, made Mr. Moretti scowl. It was a pre-filled form with my name, address, asset numbers, and listed David as the consenting son. Melissa was named as the petitioner for managing my finances and emergency medical decisions. The date on the document was set for the week after the cruise ended. I turned to David. Did you sign this? He shook his head, voice rough. No. She mentioned it, but I refused. She said it was just a temporary precaution, only in case something happened to you. Mr. Moretti nodded and motioned to the staff. Proceed to Phase 3. That folder contained 3 PDF documents related to my property in Maine. One was an updated appraisal report, with notes and highlights, market stable, quick sale possible. Another was a drafted email to a real estate broker. Dear MS. Addison, I'm in the process of acquiring legal authority over MS. Judith Holloway, owner of the Sebago Lake cabin. Per her and her son's agreement, I've been authorized to handle an expedited sale of the property within 30 days. Please send partnership terms and schedule a legal inspection visit. This is unbelievable, I murmured. She wrote this before even getting my signature. And this, Charles said, opening a folder with a strange name, prospect list. Inside was an Excel file with 12 names, each entry listing age, occupation, estimated assets, region, marital status. Email addresses and phone numbers were blurred with encryption, but the names were visible. Mine was listed on the 7th row. The row below read, status, in progress. You weren't the first, Mr. Moretti said slowly, and you certainly wouldn't have been the last if we hadn't stopped her in time. I no longer felt angry. What I felt was a cold tremor crawling up my spine. She had lived in my home, eaten the meals I cooked, hugged me like a daughter, while secretly eroding my mind, recording my ramblings, emailing strangers about selling my house, and then, killing David? An accident, I whispered. What? David looked up. Check phase 4, I said. Search for that folder. The tech team quickly located a single file. Emergency response scenario. Family incident. Opening it, the top portion described unexpected risk events. Carbon monoxide leak during gas stove repair, drowsy night driving accident, or adverse drug reaction during therapy. Each scenario included notes on estate beneficiaries, life insurance forms, named recipients, and legal guidance in case a lawyer could not be reached before the incident. David read that line and dropped his hands to his lap, his mouth trembling. She was planning to kill me? No one answered. It didn't need to be said aloud. Everything was now clear. David collapsed into the velvet chair in the corner, elbows on knees, hands covering his face. I walked over and laid a hand gently on his shoulder. His skin was cold and trembling, as if every muscle in his body was holding itself together to keep from falling apart. You really didn't know? I asked, my voice hoarse after barely sleeping the night before. David didn't answer right away. He drew a long breath, dropped his hands, and looked at me with red-rimmed hollow eyes. You think I helped her? His voice cracked like a whimper. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to believe my son was completely innocent. Another part couldn't stop shaking when I recalled all the strange signs I had ignored. David brushing off my sleep issues. His insistence that Melissa was just doing her best. I sat down across from him. I need you to be honest. No more fog. How did you and Melissa first meet? David hesitated. Online. A site for people recovering from divorce. She said she cared for her mom who had Alzheimer's until she passed. She said she understood confusion, fear. It was like she could read my mind. I nodded slowly. Now I understood why Melissa's words always felt so comforting, so perfectly timed. She reached out to me before she ever met you, I murmured. David's eyes widened. His face went pale. I didn't know that, he said, barely breathing. She told me she found your blog on a retirement group. Then we met at a Boston seminar and hit it off. I exhaled, a chill filling my chest. She had emails in her laptop dated before that seminar. She targeted you to get to me. And you walked into her trap. David clutched his head. God. I told you so many times Melissa really loved me. I looked at my only child, the boy who used to cling to my leg in the kitchen, begging for candy when I turned around. David was never manipulative, never cunning. He was gentle, emotional, easily influenced. Mr. Moretti returned, carrying a thick folder, printouts of emails and chat logs from Melissa's laptop. He placed them on the table and nodded, signaling the data had been backed up. I opened one document and found an email between Melissa and a stranger under the alias Foxgrey. If David reacts emotionally, extend the timeline and suggest a leave of absence. Prevent solo contact with friends or sister. All negative reactions must be redirected with guilt. Block his access to private accounts. I handed the page to David. His face darkened as he read. My sister called a few times. But Melissa always said you needed quiet. That I should stay home. I remembered. Sarah once asked why I hadn't called her in weeks. I told her I'd been oversleeping, kept forgetting my phone. Now I realized Melissa had likely kept me from anyone outside her control. David bowed his head. I was a fool. I saw her managing your meds. I saw her recording your behavior. She said it was for your doctor's convenience. I believed her. I even told you to rest more. I reached over and gripped my son's frozen hand. It's not all your fault. People like her prey on emotional vulnerability. David choked up. If I hadn't come into her life, maybe none of this would have happened to you. I shook my head firmly. No. I'll never blame you for trusting someone. What hurts most is that she used you to get to me. David looked up, eyes glistening. I can't forgive myself. You need to be strong, I said, steady. Stronger than anything she wanted you to believe about yourself. The door opened. Charles stepped in with another security officer. He spoke gently. Melissa's awake. She's asking for a lawyer. I nodded. David still sat frozen, but I felt his hand warming inside mine. Maybe he wasn't ready to forgive himself just yet. But at least, he'd finally woken up from the lie. And that was the one thing Melissa could never control. As the ship slowly docked in Miami under the soft light of early morning, I stood silently on the third-deck balcony. The breeze tousled my hair, carrying the scent of salt and a strange taste of freedom I thought I'd lost forever during the past month. Below, a line of police cars and a specialized FBI vehicle were already waiting. The ship's security escorted Melissa between two officers, her hands cuffed in front of her, her tangled blonde hair covering most of her face. She looked back at me once. In that moment, I didn't see anger or panic in her eyes. Just emptiness, indifference, like everything that happened simply hadn't been bad enough for her. But I knew she wouldn't walk away so easily. Charles came to stand beside me. She's going to face a long list of federal charges, he said, eyes still locked on Melissa being led into the van. And not just in one state. The FBI has expanded investigations into suspicious deaths in Vermont, Arizona, and Georgia, all with financial traces linked to her. I nodded. And your wife? He pressed his lips together, his gaze softening. I never had the chance to say goodbye properly. Now I just want the truth brought to light. For her. And for the others who no longer have a voice. I placed a hand on Charles's arm. We won't let anyone be forgotten. In the weeks that followed, I worked closely with the investigative team alongside Charles. I gave my full statement, turned over voice recordings where Melissa had slipped up, and handed in all of her journals documenting my behavior, which in reality were symptoms she had induced through drugs and emotional manipulation. A forensic toxicologist confirmed that the medications found in her room could cause confusion, temporary memory loss, and dizziness, especially when administered in low doses over an extended period. David also cooperated, turning over passwords to Melissa's personal accounts he still had saved, along with messages between them from the time she started isolating him from family, friends, and even colleagues. Those messages helped the police expand their list of potential victims in her network. State authorities in Vermont reopened the investigation into Melissa's mother's death 5 years ago, a death once attributed to Alzheimer's complications, though her prior medical records showed no clear history of the disease. A string of evidence, from a will changed just before the passing to suspicious property transactions, slowly came together. Once all prosecution procedures were complete, I returned to Maine. The lakeside house I once thought would simply be a quiet place to wait out the rest of my life now felt lit by a new kind of light, one of clarity, intention, and peace. David decided to take a break from work and move back in with me. He cleaned up his old room, changed the curtains, added a small bookshelf so we could reread the classic novels we both loved back when he was in high school. Some evenings we sat on the porch. He'd strum his guitar softly while I peeled apples like I used to. We didn't need to say much. Just being in that space together was healing enough. Charles stayed in touch. He didn't move nearby, but he came by often on weekends, bringing updates from other victims. Families that had been deceived, older women like me who had been hurt but never spoken up. Together, we decided to start a small fund, the Silver Light Fund, dedicated to supporting victims of financial abuse and emotional manipulation among the elderly. I used part of an old real estate investment to kickstart the fund, while Charles leveraged his former media connections to help share our message. I learned to use social media, joined discussion panels, gave interviews, and told my story as a reminder. Sometimes, the predator doesn't come in darkness, but with a smile, concern, and kind promises. One early autumn afternoon, I stood by the large window looking out over the lake, holding a mug of hot ginger tea, watching steam curl upward like morning mist. The trees had begun turning golden and amber, casting soft reflections on the still water. David was gardening in the backyard, while Charles sawed a few old wooden planks behind the shed. Their laughter echoed through the air, bringing a new rhythm of life back to this house. I sat in my familiar rocking chair, eyes resting on the tea in my hands. Just one glass of wine, moved from one hand to another. A small, instinctive act. But it saved my life. And maybe, it saved my son from becoming the last pawn in the game Melissa had built. Sometimes, what protects us isn't knowledge or strength, but intuition. That quiet whisper inside, as faint as early fog but strong as the mountain wind before winter. And now, more than ever, I've learned to listen to it. My story might have ended in healing and reunion, but I know there are still so many out there, maybe parents, grandparents, or even you, who are silently enduring pain within their own families. Have you ever seen someone treated like a burden just because they were aging? Have you ever watched someone you love get manipulated with sweet words that masked cold intentions? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about what happened to me and my son? If you were in our shoes, what would you have done? Please share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes, your story might be the light that guides someone else out of the dark. And if stories about family, betrayal, and the journey to reclaim your voice speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Because every family holds stories no one expects, and I'll be here to share more with you, stories of awakening, of courage, and of how we, no matter how far we've fallen, can rise and rewrite the fate we thought was sealed.